Welcome in to Daily Faceoff Live, your go-to source for everything hockey. Live every weekday at noon Eastern.
Welcome in. It's a Monday. That means a new week of Daily Faceoff Live, and a busy one as well, as it's All-Star Week, or at least All-Star Weekend is coming up around the league. Tyler Remchuk and Mike McKenna with you for today's show, though. Mike, how are you doing?
I am good. I think I coached about 15 games this weekend with the St. Louis Blues Warriors team, all the veteran players in St. Louis, and they took home 2 championships at Delta and Alpha level. Tyler, I think my weekend might have been a little bit better than your chins, though, buddy. You doing okay?
Yeah, a little pond hockey action out in Jasper for me and the Nation crew, and Frank Saravalli was there as well. I took a puck up top, but don't worry, Mike. I finished the game. I managed to play
Good.
the second half of that one, so it's all good. And there's a nice shot of Team Oilers Nation and Team Flames Nation out at the Fairmont JPL after we tied our game 21-21, which I guess was fitting. Everyone went home, I guess, mildly disappointed in the result, but not disappointed at all in the weekend. Have you ever done a pond hockey tournament like this, Mike?
No, I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, man, and I was too busy actually playing the game on rinks, I guess, in the winter. So I'd love to,
There you
though,
go.
man. This is like bucket list stuff for me. Look at the mountains in the background. What a setting, man.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. Let's get into the hockey talk a little bit, but before we throw 2 minutes and 30 seconds up on the clock, we should start with some news from today. As Hockey Hall of Famer Bobby Hull, an original superstar of the sport, passed away today. He began his career back in 1957. He became one of the most feared goal scorers of all time. Of course, his legacy comes with some rather ugly blemishes on it off the ice, and that's probably putting it a little lightly. But we obviously send our condolences to the Hull family on the passing of a guy who, in his prime, Mike, really did revolutionize the game.
Yeah, in a lot of ways. I mean, he was one of the first guys. Him and Stan Mikita for the Blackhawks were soaking stick blades and putting them in door jams overnight to put a big old hook on them, and so that changed the game a bunch. And really a true power forward, and that legacy carried on through his son Brett and the rest of the family that obviously had great NHL careers. But there's plenty of stories of Bobby Hull floating around St. Louis, and those would probably be a whole different podcast, I'd say, for that, because there's
Yeah.
no shortage of them.
Our condolences to the Hull family. Not always an easy transition off of that, but let's throw 2 minutes and 30 seconds up on the clock and start with the feel-good story of the weekend, and something that's going to go down as one of the feel-good stories of the entire season. Saturday night in Edmonton, when the Oilers, up big on the Chicago Blackhawks, decide to go to their EBug between the pipes, and it's University of Alberta Golden Baron, former Sherwood Park Crusader Matt Berlin, who gets to go into the game. It was an unbelievable scene, as you can see here. He gets to wear the motorcycle vest for the Oilers player of the game, an Edmonton product who actually, Mike, was on the same bantam team as Stuart Skinner, as well as Tyler Benson and James Hamblin. So he's been a teammate with some of these Oilers before, gets to live out the dream and make an appearance in an NHL game. Before I get your thoughts on it, we do have Jay Woodcroft after the game, just kind of taking us through how this all came about.
Matt Berlin in the last 2.5 minutes.
Yeah, a few things went into it. First of all, it came from the players. So we talked about it on the bench. We wanted to make sure we did it in a respectful way, because we have nothing but respect for the Chicago Blackhawks, their players and their coaching staff. But we just wanted to give somebody an opportunity that they'll remember for the rest of their lives. And, I was proud of our team that they came to that decision. Jack Campbell came to the bench at the TV timeout. We told him what we were thinking. He was all on board. He was so happy for it. And the opportunity presented itself, and that's what we did. And, the good on the young man for going out there and making a save. And, I'm sure he will carry that memory with him the rest of his life. He'll be in the record books as having played in the National Hockey League.
Jay, what does that say about
Mike, your thoughts on just what the Oilers did there in that moment?
Well, you would see this in college hockey sometimes at the NCAA level, where your third goaltender, who may never play a game at college, gets tossed in for the last 4 or 5 minutes just because of the hard work they've put in. This one's a little bit different because, like Jay Woodcroft said, it's an experience. I mean, Berlin was doing homework 4 hours before the game, Tyler. This is wild stuff. But it's just really cool. And I loved in the line afterwards, you could see Jack Campbell come over and be so excited for Matt Berlin. And like you said, some of the parallels being Stuart Skinner's minor hockey teammates, and It's really cool. He's from Edmonton. He's plays for the U Alberta. I mean, it couldn't have been any better. I was a little surprised because I didn't actually know this was possible for an EBug to go in. Like he was backing up that game rather than being an emergency guy. So it was totally fine. I just was kind of caught out by that a little bit. But 1-for-1, made a save on Caleb Jones on a snapper from the top of the circle. Got a big ovation from the crowd, and good on Connor McDavid, who also did say afterwards, he's a young kid. Matt Berlin's 25. Connor, you're 26. I just thought that was hilarious.
Yeah, I like that one as well. And just for those who are maybe wondering the difference, so you cannot bring in your EBug unless there is a legitimate injury. But the difference here is that Matt Berlin signed an amateur tryout before the game because they knew he'd have to back up well before puck drop. So because he was on an amateur tryout and wasn't the EBug brought in from, the press box halfway through the game, they were allowed to do this. So the stars just kind of aligned perfectly for Matt Berlin to get a chance to throw on his hometown team's jersey on Saturday night. Let's talk about some other results from around the league on the weekend and the Central Division is getting very interesting, Mike. You have the Stars and Jets, who are both on 3-game losing streaks, but losing streaks that are really not all that similar, because you have the Stars who have lost 3 straight in overtime, as you can see here. But regardless, they're both slipping a little bit. Is there one of these two teams you're a little bit more concerned about than the other?
Yeah, it's definitely not the Stars. I mean, take a look at the teams that the Stars played and lost in overtime. They're all 3-2 games. It's against Buffalo, Carolina, Jersey, man. Like, those are 3 teams that could all be in the playoffs this year. Okay, Buffalo could make it. We know how good Carolina and Jersey are. And I think for Dallas, really, they still play a really consistent game, man. And, there's been times before this year where they've lost 2 in a row. They get a big performance from their goaltender, pulls them out of it, whatever. Like, it just didn't happen for them. I'm not concerned about that club. I'm really not even concerned about Winnipeg. It's just that they haven't been the same lately, man. 6 of the last 8 games for the Jets, they've scored 2 goals or less. And that's not acceptable for a team that's got Kyle Connor and Wheeler and Dubois and Scheifele. Like, you go down the list, even Josh Morrissey, man, he's been really cold in the last 4 games. So what concerns me with Winnipeg is just Rick Bowness questioning the compete level pretty often here lately. So I think they'll get it back together, but Minnesota and Colorado are looming, man. They're 3rd and 4th in the division. Both those games have 3 games in hand, on Winnipeg and Dallas. And key word here, the Central's going to tighten up, especially with Colorado coming. They're 7-3 in their last 10, Tyler.
Yeah, so let me give you a little fill-in-the-blank question here. The Colorado Avalanche have a blank % chance of winning this division.
Oh, geez. I mean, to catch Dallas, and they're still 9 points back of them, even with the games in hand, I'm not going to say it's great. I think Colorado could easily finish second, but it's hard to make up ground when you only have 30 games left. So I think Colorado finishes second or third in the Central.
All right, yeah, it'll be really interesting. And then another thing too, right now, I mean, you have Colorado sitting as a wild card team, and just based on how the Pacific Division is compared to the Central, if the season ended today, man, congratulations, Seattle, you'd win the Pacific Division, and you get the Colorado Avalanche or maybe even the LA Kings potentially in round 1. Like, the Avs being a wild card team could really throw things off in terms of the playoff picture, but I got a feeling they'll find a way to crawl out of that. The top of the division getting interesting, but it is hard to not like the Dallas Stars, who, yeah, I mean, only 13 regulation losses this season, and you can sit there and moan and groan about, OT losses and whether or not they should be counted that way or whatever. The bottom line is the Stars are bringing a lot of games to OT, and they're being rewarded for it. It's a big reason why they're still in the top spot in the division. There are a couple of teams in that Central that are just flat out sellers, and that's the topic of our first deadline countdown that we had over the weekend from Frank Saravalli. Every day a new article coming out, and on Sunday he took a look at the 5 sellers with substantial assets to potentially move. The list includes the Vancouver Canucks, the Chicago Blackhawks, the Coyotes, the Blues, and the Montreal Canadiens. Mike, which GM, this is the way I'll go with this, which GM could potentially bring in the most in terms of assets returned, in your opinion?
Well, I think Frank's got it right with the top 2 for sure. I mean, if Patrick Alvin in Vancouver really wants to go full send, man, he's got a lot to work with, because it goes beyond Horvat, Shen, and Besser for me. He's still got Garland, Myers. I'd even consider moving Thatcher Demko if they really want to make things go in the future in Vancouver, but I don't see that happening. Okay, I'm putting my own GM hat on here. I mean, just look at the numbers in Chicago, man. Like it's just, there's a lot of people that have value on that list. I mean, Tyler, you and I have even talked about Jack Johnson. We think would be a decent pickup for somebody for some depth on D. I said, CU, Domi, McCabe. So as you go down this list, it kind of gets murky. I mean, Arizona's got a couple pieces. St. Louis is still a question mark. Montreal, I like Sean Monahan though. That's one I'd really keep an eye on. I think third line center, he can really help a team. And not on the list is the San Jose Sharks. They were just off. Keep them in mind because they got a big piece in Timo Meier they got to figure out here. So I think the realistic option might be Chicago because Vancouver's a bit of a wild card for me.
Yeah, for me, the biggest wild card is the St. Louis Blues with Vlad Tarasenko and Ryan O'Reilly. I mean, if they move on from O'Reilly, they're going to get an absolute haul for the guy. He's got a Conn Smythe trophy under his belt. Why would you not want that guy on your team? And with Tarasenko, I think what'll be interesting is a guy like Patrick Kane is the sort of premier winger on the market this season. But just like Claude Giroux last year, Patrick Kane holds the keys to where he wants to go. If he sits there and says, hey, I'm not going anywhere, and he's off the market, or if he says, I am only going to insert the market, New York, Buffalo, whatever it ends up being, he goes, I'm only going there, then I think there all of a sudden could be a handful of teams who go, oh, we can't get Kane. It's impossible. He won't waive to come to us. Check down, go right to Vlad Tarasenko. And I think he's a guy whose market could potentially really heat up over the next couple of weeks here.
Yeah, and he needs a change of scenery. I mean, he's got 10 goals on the year, only 2 of which are on the power play. It's not going in St. Louis right now, but keep an eye on Ivan Barbashev there as well. I mean, he had 60 points last year. He's probably more like a 40-point player, but he hits like a Mack truck, man. He put Sam Girard out of the playoffs last year, and I think a lot of teams look for that grit on top of the scoring that may come with it. So either of those two players, along with O'Reilly, St. Louis, and I tell you what, I do think that they're going to be sellers. That's my gut feeling here, and from hearing some things around town. So we'll see what happens with the Blues.
Mentioned the Chicago Blackhawks there, and one guy on that list of who's available that's garnering a lot of interest apparently around the league is Jake McCabe, the steady defenseman. He's got some term left on that contract, so he's not a pure rental. This is a guy who a bunch of teams could look at and go, hey, we're not only getting him for the next 2-3 months here and for our Stanley Cup push, we're getting him next year, we're getting him the year after, and he's going to be a long-term piece on our blue line, as you can see here. Not an offensive defenseman by any means, but Frank does have kind of a full scouting report on him. Mobility being the one key weakness, I suppose, but still very good at shutting things down in his own end. He does a nice job limiting mistakes. Some potential fits that Frank wrote about are the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Edmonton Oilers, and the LA Kings. Something to remember with all of this is that McCabe actually has a pretty limited no-trade list. He can submit, I believe it's 7 teams that he can nix a deal to, and there is some talk that the Oilers are on that list, and a handful of other Canadian teams are as well. But when you look at McCabe, Mike, and you hear fits like Leafs, Oilers, Kings, is there one team you look at and go, they got to key in on this guy?
Yeah, well, I think the Leafs do make a whole lot of sense, especially with Jake Muzzin presumably being out for the long term here, and the value of the contract that Jake McCabe would come with. I think he'd slide in really well, and you put him next to whether he's playing with TJ Brody or anybody else, he's a rock, and that's really, you're looking for value deals with term if you're the Toronto Maple Leafs because of those big deals that they have up front to Matthews and Nylander and Tavares, go down the list. So I'd really like him there. And like you said, the thing is, McCabe doesn't want to play in Canada, man. Like 6 of the 7 teams on his no trade list are Canadian clubs. Guess who isn't, though? It's Toronto. If McCabe was an expiring contract, if this was the last year of his deal, then I'd say the Oilers would probably still have a good chance because he wouldn't have to play a couple more years there, but he doesn't want to be there, at least in terms of what his contract says. You never know what a player can be convinced of because that Edmonton team's really good. You want to go try to win a Stanley Cup. That's the part that matters for me. And LA, I don't know. They got a lot of pieces there. Would he help them a little bit? Probably, but I don't think he'd have the same value that he would for a team like Toronto. And look, dude, McCabe's going to get a first rounder and some change for sure. So like if I'm Davidson in Chicago, I'm moving on from him for sure. If I can get whatever I can, sell it high.
And you know what's maybe even a bit of a wild card in terms of what Davidson could get in return is what would happen if he says, you know what, Toronto, I really want insert prospect here on top of the first round pick. Maybe it's Matthew Nyes, and goes, I'll keep half this guy's contract for the next couple of seasons as well. And yeah, you might sit there and go, boy, why would you retain money on a guy with that kind of term left? But if it gets you the impact prospect and a first round pick you want, I think at that point, if they're willing to do it, the Leafs would be stupid not to pull the trigger on it. Because if you can get that guy for that cheap for the next couple of seasons, you're laughing. Your cap picture becomes so much more easier to manage.
Yeah, you just hope he stays healthy, Tyler. That's the only problem. You got a banged up blue line with Toronto the past couple of years and McCabe. Hey, but here's the thing. He has been healthy over the last couple of seasons, so you hope that's all in the past for the player.
Really interesting stuff. We'll have a little bit more on the Leafs and some trade deadline stuff. Goaltending specific, though. Let's get into this week's edition of the Blue Paint. The Blue Paint brought to you by our friends at Montana's. And Mike, we're sticking in the Central Division, actually. We've done a lot of Central Division talk today. I want to pick your brain a little bit on what's going on with the Minnesota Wild and maybe a bit of a goaltending controversy brewing. Here's how I'll spin it to you. If game one of the playoffs was today, which goalie would be starting for the Wild?
It should still be Marc-Andre Fleury, even though upstart Philip Gustafsson has been lights out in net for the Minnesota Wild. Now, let me tell you why. You look at the sheer stats here on the season, and you would think, man, Gus has been unbelievable. And well, he really has. That's the thing. Like, he's got a .922 save percentage. In 13 of his 18 starts, he's allowed 2 goals or less for the Minnesota Wild. But it's really he's kind of coming into his own. It's his first year being in the NHL full time. And early in the year, Tyler, Gustafsson was facing lesser opponents. Okay, he had the easier of the schedule. Since the new year, that's changed, though. He's played Tampa Bay, St. Louis, Washington, Florida, some of these tougher clubs. But Fleury's still getting the bulk of the starts for the Minnesota Wild. He's had the heavier low workload. He's played 31 games, tougher schedule, and he's still 16, 10, and 3. Now, a save percentage down at 905 doesn't look as good. But like I say, it has been a harder schedule, and there's that playoff experience. You know, you got a couple Stanley Cups hanging around for Fleury. Gustafsson doesn't have any playoff experience. And even in goals saved above expected, it's a mismatch, right? Gustafsson's at 13th, Flowers at 43rd. But I still think, given the workload and given the fact that Fleury is the heartbeat from the back end, playing the majority of games, the goalie they're most used to, at this point, I would still say Fleury. But we know with Dean Evason as the head coach of the Minnesota Wild, this will continue to be a battle till the very end. And I think that Gustafsson has shown very well this year to project what he could do in future seasons.
And Fleury's numbers have been getting a little bit better as the season's gone on as well. It was a bit of a slow start for him. Sticking in the Western Conference, but flipping to the Pacific. Both LA and Seattle firmly in the playoff picture in that division, yet they've each struggled between the pipes this season. Either of those teams, or maybe do one of those teams compared to the other, really need to shop hard for a goalie at the deadline?
Well, here's the hard part. What's available in terms of goal? And it's not a very good market, I think, for goaltenders out there right now, especially for anybody that's on an expiring contract. You're kind of limited to Cam Talbot of the Ottawa Senators or James Reimer of the San Jose Sharks. Reimer's had an okay year at best behind a really tough team in San Jose. And I think Talbot has been pretty good. It's just, who are they going to be better than for either of these teams in Seattle or LA? Jones is 23-7-3. Okay, like he's got an .895 save percentage, which isn't sterling, but he's winning games. And Grubauer has something of similar numbers. He's got an .897 compared to it, but he's not winning as often. So, if I'm Seattle, and especially with the contract status of Grubauer and Jones, I don't think that they can really do much better going towards playoffs here. Is it Talbot or Jones? At this point, I think it's kind of a wash, even though Talbot has a .921 career save percentage in playoffs. I do think LA might be in the same boat. Like Copley's 15-3 playing for that team, and he's got a .901 save percentage, which isn't great, but they at least still have Jonathan Quick sitting in the hole. Okay. And Quick hasn't been great over the past couple of years, but man, he can still rattle off a great game here and there. So I actually think, Tyler, both of these teams should probably stand pat at the trade deadline. If they think that they absolutely have to go get someone out there, Cam Talbot's probably the answer, but the market is really weak this year.
Yeah, it is, which is very interesting because I even think a team like the Sabres could be sniffing around the goaltending market as well. Going out east, the Toronto Maple Leafs going to be without Matt Murray for the next couple of weeks here, but that's opening the door for a guy from their American League team to get a look, and you have some insight on that.
Yeah, it's somebody that I've known since he was, 12 or 13. We used to have Joseph Woll, the Toronto Marlies goaltender, now up with the Toronto Maple Leafs, as one of our, I guess you could almost say, proteges here in St. Louis. I tell you what, this kid was a dynamo at a young age, and it's taken him a little while to reach the status he's at now in the American Hockey League. He's an all-star this season. He's had an unbelievable year so far, 12-1 for the Marlies with a .928 save percentage, and his career NHL numbers are good. They're favorable. The problem is that he's just been hurt a lot, Tyler. The past couple of years have been a struggle to stay in the lineup. He has all the skill in the world. He can skate like crazy, tracks pucks well. All of those things, all those intangibles that made him a third-round pick in 2016. I think the ceiling for Joseph Woll is a legit NHL goaltender. I think he can still be a starter. I know it's taken a while. He just has to be healthy. He has to play a lot of games. And maybe we get to see a glimpse of it this year. But Ilya Samsonov has been outstanding in that net for Toronto. I don't think Woll's going to see a lot of action, but he's somebody that we should keep an eye on.
Fantastic stuff, as always, Mike, with the Blue Paint. Certainly some teams and storylines to keep an eye on over the next month here as we lead up to the trade deadline. As always, it's brought to you by Montana's. And if you're sitting there going, man, I want to give Montana's a try, well, we got a little contest going for you this week. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Daily Faceoff. You will see the post go up at some point today. You will follow the instructions you see here on your screen, and you will have a chance to win $25 to go try out that brand new comfort menu at Montana's or take advantage of some of their daily deals. Head to montanas.ca to find a location near you. Ask DFO time, our daily inbox question. If you have a question for us this week, send it in on Twitter using the hashtag AskDFO. And Mike, as we put a wrap on January, there was 2 players who tied for the scoring lead in the NHL in the month, or the first month of 2023. It was Jack Hughes and Matt Tkachuk, really coming to his own in Florida, going to be going to the All-Star game as well. And the question is, has your opinion of that blockbuster changed now that we're kind of at the unofficial halfway point of the season?
Not really for me, because I think the Florida Panthers have gotten exactly what they expected of Matthew Tkachuk. You know, he's basically on the same point arc that he was last year with the Calgary Flames and even previous years. So I'm still the same way with this. I think that Florida made too many changes in the offseason. I understand that they had to do something, right? But I don't think that this is a wash. I think Huberdeau would have been just as good this year. I think they're just getting the player they expected in Florida.
Yeah, that's fair, and it's also worth noting the term and the age and things like that. My opinion's changed a little bit just because I thought the Flames got really good value, but then you kind of look at the way Huberdeau and Sutter have butted heads and the way his production's fallen off this season. Weegar maybe hasn't come as advertised either. I still think it's close, but before, I think I would have tipped a little bit more in Calgary's scale when the deal was first made, and now just seeing how Tkachuk has been able to pick up his production and keep rolling, I think I'm the other way. I'm tipping it a little bit more towards Florida, but it's always fascinating to keep an eye on things like this throughout the season. Let's move along to our daily bet segment, brought to you by Pointsbet Canada, and there is one game in the NHL tonight. We're slowing down with about half the league on their bye weeks this season, but it's Winnipeg taking on St. Louis, and I have a couple of plays for this one that I like, starting with a Blake Wheeler assist. This thing is plus money on PointsBet, and guess what? He has 5 assists in his last 5 games. A couple of those are multi-assist games, but regardless, I like Blake Wheeler to pick up an apple, mainly because I like the Jets to keep their offense going. The Blues have been struggling as of late. They've allowed 21 goals against in their last 5 games. They've also allowed north of 25 shots on goal in 4 of those games, and that's why I'm also taking the Nick Ehlers shot prop. It's set at 3.5. He's crushed this in 4 of his last 5. I love him to do it again tonight against a Blues team that is just kind of struggling along right now, and a Jets team that should be highly motivated after their team called them out. So give me a Wheeler apple, the Nick Ehlers shot prop, and those are my 2 plays for a small, lonely night of NHL action. And that brings us to garbage time, Mike. What did you bring up from the weekend?
Man, I saw this come across, and it's kind of been a slow build that I didn't know about, but Vitek Vanacek, the goaltender of the New Jersey Devils, who, by the way, has been fantastic for them in the past month or so, really the whole season, but I think he's been great lately. Listen to this. Just listen to this. This is unbelievable.
You know what happened? That ref scared me when he whistled.
How would you describe your style?
I mean, like, I'm a funny guy, you know. Like, I am so happy they like me, and then they are really nice to me. So thank you so much. It's really nice to go like that. I'm really proud of the VTech, you know. And then I hope you're gonna keep going, and then the team do the same thing like what they do. Yeah, I was just trying to stay me, you know, stay by VTech, you know, like Vitek has to be always same, and then just play hockey and then not thinking about anything else. Yeah, honestly, I think we're gonna go for hibachi. Yeah, it's just across the street, and then we was talking with my wife yesterday, we will go for hibachi, so I can't wait.
A little hibachi just across the street. You like the guy flipping the food around. It's a pretty good experience.
Yeah, it is nice. I love that.
Better hands than you?
For cooking, yes. I don't know if in the net.
So Tyler, I mean, like, who doesn't love the volcano onion at hibachi? Vitek's a big fan of it. He's gotta be. So listen, dude, this is unbelievable content, and Vitek Vanacek has just rocketed to the top of my list for favorite NHL goalies for those post-game interviews, man. Like, and I'll tell you what, this is important in a locker room. That personality comes out. Quirky, funny, happy-go-lucky. And I think that's a big part because the players surrounding him in New Jersey seem to have that same type of vibe to them. I think it's a reason why they're playing well. So I hope it keeps it up. I hope the Vitek continues being the Vitek, because this is gold, and he's been a big part of that team. So this just made my entire weekend, man, that whole clip.
Yeah, that was hilarious. Everybody loves the Vitek. For the McKenna and the Yaremchuk, that's a wrap on the Daily Faceoff Live Monday edition of the show. We'll be right back at it, though, tomorrow at noon Eastern. In the meantime, keep it locked on dailyfaceoff.com. Enjoy your Monday, and we'll chat again tomorrow.
Thanks for tuning in to Daily Faceoff Live. Make sure you hit the subscribe button to never miss an episode.